channel, The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. I'm wearing one of my fancy booktube hats, and I recently did a couple of TikTok videos where I did like rapid fire recommendations for if you like this, try that for SFF books. And I thought between those two videos, that was a good enough list of recommendations to recycle as a long-form YouTube video with more in-depth explanations for why I would recommend these books for people who liked these other books. I've got 9 pairs of books here. I think in the original TikTok videos I did 4 in part 1 and 5 in part 2, which I hope sort of span a pretty wide range of what's in the SFF genres, and I think this is going to be fun. So my first book pairing is if you like the Locked Tomb series by Tamsyn Muir, I recommend Saint Death's Daughter by C.S.E. Cooney. I have a full review of this book on this channel that I will link for you. You can check that out. And this is one where I've seen a number of other people give this recommendation, saying that they would recommend Saint Death's Daughter to fans of the Locked Tomb series. So I don't think I'm insane here, but it is a little bit hard to pin down what the qualities are of this book that remind me of these books. They are both necromancy books, but that's not it, or at least not all. There is sort of indulgent quality in both the writing and the very elaborate world building in this book that I think is a little reminiscent of what Tamsyn Muir does in the Locked Tomb series, even though the vibes are so very different. Like, this is the frilly pink necromancy book and this is the dark goth necromancy book. But they are both kind of totally bonkers, and they both keep you on your toes as to where any of this is going. Next, for fans of the Queen's Thief series by Whalen Turner, which is a YA series that was written over the course of many, many years. This first book was popular when I was a kid. I recommend Year of the Reaper by Makiia Lucier. This is a standalone YA fantasy that is similarly character-focused, very political, and relies on some key plot twists in the narrative, but also, like the Queen's Thief series, is very, very light on magic. Like, both of these take place in a secondary world where magic is not accepted in society to be a thing that exists, but in the Queen's Thief books, there is some divine intervention that happens, and in Year of the Reaper, our protagonist has developed the ability to see ghosts, and it's not the focus of the plot, but it's something that informs him throughout. Next is one of a few pairings in this video that I think made more sense in my brain for TikTok than it does for YouTube, because I was trying to think of books that are more popular on TikTok and then pairing them with something that I don't see on TikTok specifically. And I feel like BookTok has like a hyper fixation on very new releases most of the time, like more so than BookTube ever did in my like hazy, nostalgic memory of what BookTube was like in its heyday. So I have several pairings in here that are, if you like this new popular book, you may like this book that was in fact popular on BookTube back in the day. And I feel like my BookTube audience is more likely to be aware of those backlist books. But still, if you like Emily Wilde's Enyclopaedia of Faeries by Heather Fawcett, in fact, this whole series, this is going to be a trilogy, there are 2 books out, I would recommend you try the Memoirs of Lady Trent series by Brennan. The first book is A Natural History of Dragons. And if you're not up on new releases, but you liked Lady Trent, try Emily Wilde. Mostly because these protagonists have so much in common. They are both academics who are like hyper enthusiastic about their respective fields of study, dragons in this case, fairies in this one. And those academic passions bring them both into a lot of unexpected situations on their travels. I have a full review on this channel of Emily Wilde's Enyclopaedia of Faeries. I will link that. Next, and I did say this in my last video, which was a 3-series review video, but if you like the Wayfarers series by Becky Chambers, starting with The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, can I convince you to read the Tinkered Starsong trilogy by Gail Carriger, starting with Divinity 36? In my review of this series, I focused a lot, I think, on the characters and their circumstances and the plot. This is The first book in this series I think is quite cozy, the second two books a little less so. But this is a story with a lot of emphasis on found family and also a lot of explorations of fun, imaginative alien cultures, which I didn't touch on as much in my series review, but it is the reason that the Becky Chambers Wayfarer books come so strongly to mind. We have characters from several different alien species in this core group of characters in these books, but we also get this full immersion into the world and culture of the Dicey, as our human protagonist Fex is recruited to become a god in their K-pop-like music religion. But along the way, he also has to learn their language and learn about their food and their architecture and why they don't do romantic relationships the same way humans do, and it's a lot, and it's very weird and very fun. My next sci-fi pairing here is another one of those, if you like these new books, you may also like those old books, where I do expect my YouTube audience is already well familiar with both of these series. However, if you like the Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells, I would recommend the Vorkosigan Saga by Lois McMaster Bujold. I have only read 3 of the Vorkosigan books, so that's my disclaimer here. I've read both of the books in this bind-up Cordelia's honor. That's Shards of Honor and Barrayard. This is a great place to start, and I've also read The Warrior's Apprentice. But in terms of being just exceedingly consumable, fun sci-fi reads with very fast-paced plot and also really compelling characters, these two series are more or less in the same mode and style of sci-fi writing. It's just that the Vorkosigan Saga is a few decades older. I also think that the Murderbot Diaries is in part so popular because it's taking up this tried and true mantle of how to tell a really fast-paced, exciting sci-fi plot with just a slightly updated sensibility. Back to fantasy, I have another if you like this new book, try this old one pairing. If you like Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher, try Daughter of the Forest by Juliet Marillier. I do think my booktube audience knows about Juliet Marillier. Maybe not. I was really into her books like around the time I started my booktube channel like 8 years ago. And she was not a new writer at the time, this was not a new series, but this was still a recommendation that I saw a good deal on booktube. But I don't think I've ever seen anyone talk about Daughter of the Forest on TikTok. And while I've been super thrilled lately to see how many people have read and loved Nettle and Bone, the reason that I love this book so much, I think, has to do with how much this reminds me of the type of feminist fairy tale literature that was very influential on me as a younger reader. This feels like an update on those sorts of books for the 2020s. And Daughter of the Forest is one of those books that comes most strongly to mind for me. This is technically the first book in a series, but the first book works totally well as a standalone, and it is, I think, the only book in the series that's a direct fairy tale retelling. This is a retelling of the Wild Swans. This is very slow-paced and very focused on the trials and tribulations of the protagonist as she comes of age under the very difficult circumstances of this fairy tale. I would put in this category of fairy tale books also a bunch of Robin McKinley's novels. Not all of hers are fairy tale-ish, but the ones that are Beauty, Rose Daughter, Spindle's End, Deerskin, and Chalice. So I would add all of those as an addendum to this recommendation. The thing that Nettle and Bone has that's unique, that is distinctively T. Kingfisher, is Ursula Vernon's very recognizable sense of humor. Like, no one does that exactly like she does. And that's why Ursula Vernon / T. Kingfisher fans will read anything she writes, ranging from horror to romance. Speaking of horror, if you like Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia, I am going to recommend All the Murmuring Bones by A.G. Slater. This is the same author who also goes by the name Angela Slater. There are a lot of very specific Gothic fiction tropes that both of these books have in common that I don't think I can necessarily point out without spoilers for either book, but there are some striking similarities. Mexican Gothic is historical Gothic horror set in 1950s Mexico, I think of All the Murmuring Bones as being more of a dark fantasy novel, even though it is a similar level of spooky to Mexican Gothic, as opposed to thinking of it primarily as a horror novel. And I think that is because this takes place in a secondary fantasy world with like a lot of world building and its own internal folklore and stuff. So my mind goes to fantasy and dark fantasy as the genre for this one before it goes to horror, but I think you could also make the argument that this is a horror novel. I recommended this one because it has some very specific similarities to Mexican Gothic in particular, but I would also recommend, it's sitting right here, The Path of Thorns. Same author, same fantasy world, similar level of spooky, possibly even more gothic. I haven't yet read The Briar Book of the Dead, which is the third of these she's published, but probably also very similar. Back to sci-fi. If you like A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martine, I would recommend Seven of Infinities by Aliette de Bodard. This is a subterranean press novella set in the Julia universe. I think this would be a good entry point to the Shuyu universe. It is a standalone. I have a full review of this novella on this channel in which I mention some of the similarities that I noticed it had with A Memory Called Empire because it was something I noticed at the time I read it. These are both sapphic, they're both set in space opera worlds, and they both have plot points that center around the transfer of memory from past individuals to present day ones, but those transfers are handled very differently in these two societies. In A Memory Called Empire, the protagonist has the memories of the person who had her job last, and she tested into that job and that inherited memory with her own aptitudes and affinities. But in this one, it's a family thing where you get the memories of your ancestors, and being allowed to have that is a social status thing. And then my last book pairing I'm going to recommend in this video is probably the one that is least obvious from just like the basic book descriptions of these books that they would be comparable in any way. But if you like The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin, I would recommend The Saint of Bright Doors by Vajra Chandrasekhara. The settings of these books are so dramatically different from one another. The Broken Earth trilogy is this epic fantasy in this sort of post-apocalyptic, post-disaster setting. And The Saint of Bright Doors is set in a much more modern fantasy world with like contemporary technology, but so many layers of strangeness and weirdness that reveal themselves the further into the book you get. But these both have an incredible amount of social commentary packed into them, and I think despite the modern setting, The Saint of Bright Doors feels similarly epic. They also both play some tricks on you with the POV, with reveals that happen late in the book. So let me know what you think. Have you read any of these? Did this give you any ideas about what books you might pick up next? Do you think these recommendations were on point or not so much? Let me know in the comments. Anyhow, I hope you're having a very nice day. That is all. Bye for now.